Hola, and welcome to the premiere episode of Lucha Libre Figures and Facts, the podcast that examines the history of Lucha Libre toys and action figures, brought to you by Mask Republic, Boss Fight Studio, and the Lucha Central Network. I'm Erik Araña, and with me today is the wrestling toy expert and host of the Fullyposeable Wrestling Figure Podcast, Jefry Toon. Jeffrey's brother Matt was going to join us, but got called into work. Matt, thank you for being an essential worker and taking the risks that most of us shouldn't be taking at this time. We'll have more on Matt as he'll be joining us regularly in the future. Jeffrey, introduce yourself.
How's it going, Erik? It's good to be talking to you again.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad you're here with me.
Oh, yeah, man. When you were on our show, the Fullyposeable Wrestling Figure Podcast, that show got so much love. And from what we were hearing, it got a lot of more eyes, I should say, over to Boss Fight and Mask Republic. So, one, thank you for being on because it was a fun interview.
Oh, thank you. It was great to be there, and I'm glad it is doing well. So,
no, thanks, man. Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. It was a lot of fun. It was fun talking to you from Hasbro to G.I. Joe to everything under the sun. You know, it was a great time.
Where can people listen to your podcast?
Oh, absolutely. You can hear it on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, fullyposeablepodcast.com. You can download the Podbean app, and you can go back and listen to every single episode we've ever put out, from the horrible early days of episode 1 to a little bit better sounding now to episode 222 that will be releasing later today.
For the listeners who don't know you guys from your podcast, what's your connection to wrestling and wrestling figures in general?
So it's my brother and I call him my real life brother, not storyline brother, Scott. Scott and I have been collecting for over 35 years. We started with Remco's, we started with LJNs, and then on to Hasbro, on to old San Francisco toy makers, to Just Toys Bendems, to Toy Biz, to Jax, to now Mattel, and then now including Super 7, Boss Fight, Mask Republic, Figures Toy Company, and who's the other one? Oh, Jazzwares with the AEW line. So yeah, we've been collecting for 35, 36 years with a massive collection. We just have nowhere to put it because it's all out in totes because we don't have anywhere to put it because we've got a small space over here.
I mean, it's all amazing stuff. As for me, for those of you who don't know, I'm part owner of Boss Fight Studio, and I'm also one of the designers working on the upcoming Legends of Lucha Libre toy line. I've been in the toy industry for over 10 years, including a number of years at Hasbro, working on G.I. Joe, Transformers, Beyblade, and more. I spent most of my time at Hasbro on Star Wars, though. I'm an avid toy collector and comic collector, and I love movies and books, and I'm also a fairly prolific, time-consuming hobby of customizing. I customize a lot of books. So,
and you are a huge fan of Aquaman.
I am. I'm a huge fan of Aquaman and Green Lantern and G.I. Joe and all sorts of stuff. So as for the listeners, I hope we're all doing all right in this time of social distancing and quarantine. Hopefully this conversation about luchadors and the toys that represent them helps you get through at least one long day at home. Today we're going to be discussing two Lucha Libre legends, Rey Mysterio Jr. and Eddie Guerrero. Specifically, we'll be discussing the Jax Halloween Havoc 2-pack and the same figures from Mattel's Elite line, the importance of that match, and the figures that the match inspired. So in later episodes, we'll discuss other Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero figures, I'm sure. But today is all about Halloween Havoc 1997. First, I wanted to touch on the match a little bit, just real simply here. It was in October of 1997, October 26th, in Paradise, Nevada, at the MGM Grand Garden Arena. It was a mask versus title match. At the time, Eddie Guerrero was the Cruiserweight champion, and if he lost, Rey got the title, and if Rey lost, Eddie got his mask. Jeff, what do you remember about that night?
You know, it was okay. Let me kind of rewind a little bit. So, allegedly, my parents may or may not had a cheater box. I'm not saying if they did or not. I don't know if anybody remembers those. You know, what Spice Channel? What's that? You know, yeah. But I remember we sat down to watch it because we watched them all. And the first couple matches that night were actually really good. It was Ultimo Dragon against, and of course the name just slipped my brain right now. Next match was Jericho versus Gato, and then was Eddie and Rey. And I remember the first few matches were pretty good. And I was like, okay, this show's starting off hot. Then the Eddie and Rey match took off. It just put it on a whole different level. And they didn't stop. I think they went 14 minutes.
Yeah, it was just under 14 minutes.
Just under 14. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
It's not even the longest match of the night.
No, it wasn't. But that match just put that show on a whole different level because it was nonstop action from bell to bell. Yeah. It was nonstop. It was just move after move. And you could say, oh, it was a spot fest, or I don't care what you say. All I'm going to say is that it was a beautiful match.
I used to go over to my best friend's house, Antonio, and this is back in Florida. In my Florida days, we would go over there and watch it at his house. He would tape it, and we would often rewatch it throughout the month before the next show. And it was usually on Sundays back then, I think, most pay-per-views. And that one it started out great, and then the Eddie and Rey match, and it's a stacked card. You've got like Lex Luger and Ric Flair, you've got Kurt Hennig, you've got all these greats that night wrestling. But man, Eddie and Rey just stole the show, like, completely. This match has become one of the notoriously famous matches for just being one of the benchmarks in lucha and in wrestling in general, both in the US and Mexico and everything. Like, it's just one of those matches that has permeated. It was so strong that, 8 years after the match, Jax came back to it.
Yes.
And then even Mattel came back to it, and they were like, this is, we need to put this back out. We need to put this out again.
Yeah.
There's 3 Reys in this costume. Technically, it's only 1 Eddie, but you can kind of fudge it and say 2 maybe. But like, it is such an, if they made Eddie in that exact costume, I'd buy it again. Like, I'd be there. And it's such an important match, and it's had these like long lasting, echoes through the industry. And the last thing I kind of wanted to touch on with that was WCW NWO Revenge for N64.
Oh, yeah.
It came out exactly a year after the match, the actual match. It came out in 98. The match was in 97, 10/26, same day. It was the game by THQ. At the time, it was like voted the best fighting game that year. It was voted the best wrestling game. It was an amazing. I played this game so much.
Oh man! So I was going to college, and we would be up till 4 a.m., 5 a.m. playing this game with friends. They would be over at the house. And my mom would say, you guys stay as long as you want, because as long as you guys aren't out on the streets, hanging out till 4 or 5 a.m., I'm okay with you guys being over at the house till 4 or 5 a.m. because I know where you guys are. But anyways, friends would be over playing this game till 4 or 5 a.m., eating Doritos, just having so much fun with this game. We would have special not special referees. We have people interfere, and it's just so many memories and so much love for this game, and all those THQ games that came out at that time. But like you said, they did a callback with the Rey to the Halloween Havoc. And one thing I'm kind of curious about, and I'm going to get your opinion. Eddie and Rey faced each other so many times throughout the years. In fact, they had a ladder match at SummerSlam 2005, where it was that's still one of my favorite clips. One of my brother has a side podcast called Drunk Wrestling History. And one of the clips is at the very beginning in their intro is Michael Cole saying,
"First time in the history of the WWE, the custody of a child will be determined in a match."
And only in wrestling can that happen. But anyway,
that was such a weird storyline, and
it was awkward. But what do you think about, what was it about that Halloween Havoc match that set that match above any other Eddie and Rey matches?
Well, they both got better as they went on. So I would say that some of the matches later on that they had are technically better than this Halloween Havoc match. But the Halloween Havoc match, I think, was one of the first times, they had been at ECW and they had been at WCW for 2 years at the time, I think. I don't even think, it might not have been even that long.
Uh-huh.
Like, when did they go to ECW? I think in 96 or
95.
So 95. So 2 years in was kind of the luchador invasion of WCW. It was never really an invasion angle, but a lot of those guys started coming from Mexico, like Conan and Rey and Eddie and La Parca, and all these great wrestlers started coming up. And I think that the Halloween Havoc match was the first time that, one, I think WCW was on a big upswing at the time.
Yeah.
Or maybe they were almost at their pinnacle, because I think shortly after 97 is where they started to lose ground.
Yeah.
Like, I think during 97, they were at this pinnacle where more people were viewing it and more people were watching it. And I think that was a key introduction to what Lucha Libre could actually be and do to the American audience.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was this kind of, people had, American audience had already seen a lot of it, but that match was just, so good. And we had mentioned earlier that some of the other matches that night went longer than that match, not much longer, but a couple minutes, but they didn't have as much story and they didn't have as much action.
Right.
As that was 13 minutes straight of them jumping and flipping and running around and beating on each other, throwing each other out of the ring. It was crazy. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the first feel for Lucha Libre that people were exposed to. It certainly wasn't the first time it was there, but I think more and more people had been watching WCW, so that more and more people were exposed to it at the time.
And I think there was a lot of other factors. The Cruiserweight title was on the line.
Yeah.
Rey's outfit played a huge part.
Such an iconic look for him.
Exactly. It didn't need the custody of a child at stake. It was a fun lucha match. Now, we had seen a lot of lucha matches on Monday Nitros.
Yes.
Prior to that. But they were given just under 14 minutes and they had to go out there and just steal the show. And you know what they did?
Yeah.
It was almost like Eddie and Rey kind of looked at each other and like, yeah, we're tearing this house down tonight.
Yeah.
Not Hogan and Piper. Savage and DDP was an okay match.
Yeah, DDP always delivered no matter what.
Especially with Savage.
Yeah. Some of their feuds were amazing.
Yeah, and like I was saying earlier, Ultimo and Nagata wasn't bad. Jericho and Gato wasn't bad. But when this match hit, it just brought the crowd to a whole different level.
Yeah.
So that's what I loved about this match and why it stands out. Not because it's been immortalized because of Rey's outfit, but just going back and watching that match, and it stands up today. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of matches you'll go back and watch and go, oh, that didn't end well, or, that I'm not a professional wrestler, but that didn't look right or anything like that. But the funny thing was I was working for a company out here in Northern California called All Pro Wrestling, and I was on their camera crew. And one night, one of the wrestlers goes, "Hey," it was after training, and the guy goes, "Hey," he goes, "You want to take a bump?" I was like, "What's a bump?" He goes, "You cross your arms and you throw your hips up." And I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'll try it." I took that bump, and man, did it rattle my testicles all the way up into my throat. I was like, well, not doing that anymore. I'll leave that to you guys. Great job.
Yeah.
And one thing I do want to point out is I forgot how great it was when Eddie would walk to the ring. And this is all psychology, but he has the belt kind of just draped over his shoulder with the front facing plate facing the back.
Yeah.
And he's walking to the ring and he's got that shit eating grin, It was so beautiful. And that's the way Eddie is he knew that psychology part of the business. And even just from that, Rey comes out to the ring pretty quick in that purple and black, I should say, get up. But Eddie just kind of strolls to the ring very slowly, looking at the camera, breaking that fourth wall, you know.
Yeah, Eddie just owned the crowd, no matter what he was doing, and just, yeah, you're right, having the front plate of the belt like facing backwards is almost like disrespecting the belt, like,
yes,
you know, like it's just it was so in character for him. And I actually just rewatched the match yesterday, and it struck me the Eddie sucks chants.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, yeah, that's right. Everybody really hated Eddie, but everybody loved to hate Eddie because he was so good at it. And then he got in the ring and he just delivered on every level, no matter what.
Yeah.
And he, you know, he made the crowd hate him, and he did it so well. And it was like, I was like, it struck me as kind of this, like, yeah, nobody's going to want to admit that they were there chanting Eddie sucks.
Yep.
You know, like, nobody wants to, like, fess up to that. But we all, like, I remember, like, man, I love to hate Eddie. Because he was so good at it.
And the other thing about that is if, I don't know if you said you went back and watched it, but the Eddie and Rey match put the crowd on a whole different level, because WCW was always well known for having hot crowds. If you go back and you watch so many of those NWA, even, you can go back to the 80s, NWA, WCW, they had some amazing crowds that were just always into the matches. Rare that they ever hit a dead crowd. But anyways, those first two matches of Ultimo Dragon and the Japanese wrestler that I am running.
It was Yuji Nagata.
Thank you. How could I forget that? I'm going to get chastised for that one by some friends. But, and then Jericho and Gato, they had a hot crowd already in Las Vegas. But when Eddie and Rey came out, the fans were hot already. And then that crowd just went bonkers. Now I'm kind of doing a spoiler alert, but the following match was Mongo McMichael against Alex Wright. And that match was doomed from the beginning, and not because they had to follow Eddie and Rey. It was because it was Mongo McMichael versus Alex Wright.
Yeah. Alex hadn't hit his stride yet.
No.
As the one half of the Dancing Fools.
Exactly.
Which, you know, the other half of the Dancing Fools was in the next match, which was Disco Inferno. So.
Yes, thank you. Who's took on Jacqueline, correct.
Yes. It was an amazing match. So, like, it's 8 years before there's any product that represents this match.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of comes after WCW's demise and subsequent purchase by WWE. They start to eventually fold WCW stuff into their Jakks toy line.
Yes.
So in the best of WCW line in 2005 is the first time we see anything from this match, and that's the single Rey Mysterio Jr. in his purple costume. And I should point out here that WWE never called him Rey Mysterio Jr. He's always just been Rey Mysterio, where at WCW he was Rey Mysterio Jr.
Correct. And Jakks gets chastised a lot for a lot of their body types, and they had these big overblown guys and all this stuff. But man, if you go back and you look at a lot of those figures, they still hold up today. And that Rey Mysterio, it may have a little bit of a bigger body, bigger scale than what you would see with Rey Mysterio. But you know what? That was a that figure just blew us away, because one, it was in that best of WCW, ECW line, because they also had a best of ECW. But the best of WCW line with that Rey, I thought it was perfect. I loved it. And I know Mattel has come out with that Elite. Oh man, is it Elite 69?
Elite 67, right?
What you're going to hear right now is, this happens to me a lot, is like there have been so many wrestling figures over the 36 years we've been collecting, trying to remember who is in which series. Like if there's 70 something elites, I'm going to probably get mixed up. So you're probably going to hear that.
Oh yeah. You know what, I only know it because I wrote it down, and because it's in my notes, but like the rapid pace that Mattel puts out product as well. Like, yes. I can't keep track of any of it.
Yes. but if you go look at that Rey's beautiful. But to have this very first Rey that came out in the best of WCW line with that singlet or that outfit that he wore at Halloween Havoc 97, it really captures him. And for that to be the first one, kudos to Jax on that one.
Yeah, it's interesting because I didn't know this figure existed actually until we started researching for the show.
Mm-hmm.
There was a stretch of time, and right around 2005, where I was living in New York City and I didn't get out to toy stores as much and stuff like that. There were fewer of them in New York City for you to buy this sort of thing. So things would come and go so quick that I just didn't even know they existed. But yeah, this figure is cool. He comes with a chair, and he's admittedly, I'm coming from, it's interesting because I come from a different mindset than most wrestling collectors as a toy collector and designer, because I buy things based on both their IP, their intellectual property, their brand, and they have to be a really good toy. And I have an unreasonable expectation of what makes a good toy. I admit that. So I probably, with Jax, I was thrown off by scale. And that said, I can look at a figure and go, this is a good figure. But if it's not in scale with the other figures, I may pass on it just because of that. And at this point in 2005, this is where you start to see Jax get influenced by Marvel Legends, and adding more and more. They have like their more deluxe line that has more articulation and stuff. And I probably would have veered more towards that line than this basic line. That said, it is a great figure, and of course the costume. It's one of my favorite costumes that Rey has ever worn.
Yeah.
It's an homage to the Phantom. For those of you who don't know, is the purple-clad superhero who at the time, the movie had come out a few years prior to this, and Rey was homaging superheroes long before it was cool. Now every wrestler does it. But Rey was doing it back in the mid 90s, which was very cool of him.
Well, the only reason that I know that it was Phantom was because of my brother. So being 100% honest, I know the bare bones about comic books. Comic books, Star Wars, G.I. Joe, I know the bare bones. And it's only because of my brother. My brother is the savant at that stuff. You and him would get along great. You guys would start a lucha show and then be on to comics in about 3 minutes, I'll tell you. but yeah, that was the only reason I knew that was the Phantom, was because of my brother. But what I loved about this very first Jax figures is it almost seemed like they used a different type of purple.
Yeah.
It's almost a little bit of a darker purple, and I kind of dug it. So, and like you said, the scale does bother you, where the scale doesn't really affect me that much. And I understand where people do get thrown off by that, because if you do look at some of the Jax bigger bodies back in the day, like I'll say Earthquake or Typhoon or King Kong Bundy or whoever it may be, they were obese. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't just like they were big boys. No, they were big boys. Like, yeah, it wasn't good when they would do the bigger bodies. So I completely understand why people would get turned off by scale.
There's also from a toy design standpoint, wrestling is bigger than life. Everything about it is so overblown and so huge. You want the toys to be larger than life.
Yes.
And that's kind of like, so I understand why Jax made the decision to like, hey, we're going to make everybody these like powerhouse physiques and looking and everything like that. I get it. It's just not where I collect. And so whenever I say things like that, I'm not saying it's the wrong decision to make. I'm usually saying it's just not my decision to make, so it's not my decision to buy. Well, so like, I totally get why they were doing that.
Well, you're not wrong. And see, that's the best thing about collecting. And this is what me and my brother always say. Nobody is wrong. No. Like, if you're mint on card or loose, you're not wrong. It's what is best for you. You're the one plopping down the $20. That's your decision to buy that figure. If that figure makes you happy out of the package or in the package, that's all that matters. Yep. Whatever is making you happy, that's all that matters, because that's your hard-earned money that is going towards that company.
Yeah, and the Jack's Best of WCW packaging is really nice. It's like that black and silver. It's got the big logo up the side. Like,
Yep.
it's an attractive packaging. Speaking of that, so do you remember how much these figures were in the store when they came out?
Much cheaper than Elites.
Yes.
So I can't remember off the top of my head, but I look back because I still have some KB Toys stickers on a lot of my old figures. And what kills me is you'll see a lot of those red pen, because they always used a red pen.
Yep.
And they would mark 3 for $9.99. And you look back and you're like, man, I wish we could get that back right now, because those 3 for $9.99 was so beautiful. It goes back to the Hasbro days when we were collecting Hasbro, and you would walk in and you see that 3 for 10, we'll say 3 for 10. And you're just like, Mom, we got to get 3 figures because they're on sale right now.
Yeah, you have to get the 3.
Yeah, so, no, you don't need any more figures. Yes, we do, Mom. You don't understand.
Interesting tidbit about that. I managed KB Toys multiple stores for many years.
Nice.
Before and during college, and where every once in a while we did have to break out the red pens and write that on, but for the most part, we were sent the prices with the red slash and the like handwritten font already printed on the stickers.
Are you serious?
Yeah, like that was just how they kind of, that was part of their marketing.
Can I add that to our show notes this week?
Absolutely.
I may be bugging you to get like a formal quote, but oh my God, dude, I didn't know that. That's awesome. How long did you manage?
Oh, when I decided to go to, that I was finally going to buckle down and go to college, I was going to move to Savannah, Georgia from South Florida. Mm-hmm. I decided I wanted to find a job that I could transfer to, so I had a job when I got there. So I left my amazing job at an art store managing an Pearl Arts and Crafts, so this giant like Walmart-sized art store. Mm-hmm. And I left that job and took a risk that I could transfer, and took a job managing the night crew of a local KB Toys in Florida. And then within like 6 months or so, I left for college, and I transferred to the Savannah, Georgia store.
Oh, that's awesome.
Over the years, I kind of bounced between there were 2 stores in Savannah. There was KB, and then there was Toyworks was Toyworks was the, like, it was owned by KB, but it was like their discount store.
Okay.
And I bounced between those 2 stores off and on, managing throughout the years while I was in college. Then I eventually left KB and went to Toys R Us.
Oh, okay. Whoa.
Transferred back to Florida at a different Toys R Us.
Man, I miss KB Toys so much.
Oh, yeah.
I can't even count how many figures I found at KB Toys. More than Toys R Us. I mean, at Toys R Us, we have this lineage. We go back 36 years of going to Toys R Us. My brother and I talk about our local Toys R Us out here and how we had a connection to LJN figures. So anyways, that's for a different podcast. But anyways, but I remember so many times just walking into KB Toys, grabbing 4, 5, 6 figures off the pegs, because that was going to be $20, and I got $20. I got paid $20, and leaving with like 6 figures. I miss those days so much.
It was great. They had I bought so many. I was a customizer already, and I was crazy. So I would just raid their dump bins of the 3 for 10s and all that stuff, and just for parts. Buy stacks of figures and go home and just immediately cut them all apart.
So we'll jump back to Eddie and Ray here in a sec, but I do have to tell you my favorite KB Toys story. So back in 2000, the very first Hardy Boys 2-pack was coming out, and it was Double Slam 4, I believe it was. And we were on the hunt for it. Now, this is a hotbed figure because they were shown at WrestleMania Access 2000 that year. Everybody went crazy. Knew it was going to be coming out around summertime of 2000. So my brother and I get on the hunt for him. My brother lives out in the city called Tracy. I live in Alameda. So or San Leandro. It's about 45, 50-minute difference. So he's hitting up different KB Toys Targets and all that stuff, and Toys R Us's as well. I'm on the hunt, can't find them down here. I go to this KB Toys that nobody ever goes to because it's in a really bad area. It's close to, it borders Oakland, California.
Every town had one KB that nobody ever
Exactly. So this one is close to the border of Oakland, California, which Oakland isn't the best. So I'm like, I've got to try it because I need to find these figures. I walk in, sure enough, sitting right on this end cap is the Hardy Boys, one set. I let out a fangirl scream, like a girl that was at a boy band concert in 2000 and went banana. The workers over at the counter look because they thought something had just happened in this bad area. And they look at me and I'm like, oh, sorry, I'm just excited. I just found this. And they're like, okay, 20-year-old guy. You know? So anyways, that was the only time I ever found those Hardy Boys. It was the very first set. And so anyways, getting back to Eddie and Ray, but I had to throw that in because that's one of my favorite stories of KB Toys.
So I was looking around on eBay for prices on this single carded Ray, and he seems to go mint on card for about $35 to $55. I don't know. eBay is weird because it's not always the actual prices what they go for.
eBay is kind of hurt collecting because a lot of people see these buy it now prices, or if they have a figure and they're looking on eBay and they see a inflated buy it now price. They don't do an average. They just see an inflated buy it now. They're like, oh, I can get $55 for this figure. Well, I'm going to throw it up for 55, you know?
Yeah.
So,
I was actually checking finished. I always check the finished ones on eBay.
So listings.
And that's where I was kind of getting these prices. But Lucy's not worth a ton. He's like 15 to 20. So you're going to pay about what you would pay for a modern elite for him. But I would think that if you're going back and collecting these figures, you really want it mint on card anyway, because like we said, the card is nice, and it is kind of a, to kind of have a figure like this.
And that was part of their best of ECW and WCW line. In fact, they made a Ray in the best of ECW line too, as well, where he was in an orange outfit. And you mentioned the card on the best of ECW was also really good. It was a blue background. It had the ECW letters on it. That was another thing that I loved about Jakks is their packaging. For example, the best of WCW and ECW was fantastic. Maybe not for the early Bone Crunchers. That was still kind of
that was all very basic, but
right. But when you look at that Jakks Classic line that they came out with, man, that's still some of the best packaging that has stood up over the test of time.
Yeah. In some regards, sometimes their packaging overshadowed the product.
It did. They had to take away from the bigger bodies.
Yeah,
with the Jakks Classic, they had that gold star. And the tough thing for about mint on card people and people with OCD, you had to keep that star perfect.
Yeah.
And if that got bent, that ruined your life, man.
Yeah. And it is really hard to find some of the deluxe line in perfect condition because of that. Because of all that die cut pieces. Also, again, from a manufacturing standpoint, that packaging, that deluxe packaging with like the die cut, like curved over piece and stuff, that's expensive. Plus they had all of the foil printing and stuff. That's expensive card. That's expensive packaging.
With your background in stuff like that, how much for a complete figure, manufacturing, all that stuff, what was the average cost? Let's throw out a G.I. Joe. What was the average cost of total product?
I don't know back in like the 80s and 90s, really. But I can tell you that from the time that I was at Hasbro, like a 4-inch G.I. Joe figure, which have way more articulation, and the more articulation you add to a figure, the more deco you add, the more expensive it becomes. Like Correct. Like a standard G.I. Joe figure probably cost around $4. Now, only 10 years later, the figures that we do at Boss Fight, the 4-inch figures, they cost closer to like 7 or 8-ish. It depends. Some figures are more and some figures are less. And I would say, our 6-inch figures coming out cost probably what the retail was at the time for these 6-inch figures.
Gotcha.
Like, it really does go up really fast. And plastic is more expensive, and we're doing even more articulation than like the deluxe classic or the elite have. We're going like at one step further than that, so it's just more and more expensive, and it does become a burden.
That's interesting, because like I do know what certain toy lines pay, their bottom line for a figure from beginning product to end product. I know kind of the rough estimate, and there's a lot of people that are like, oh, those figures are too expensive. Well, one, this could be for a smaller company, and they don't mass produce they don't mass produce like a Mattel or a Hasbro. So their bottom line is higher because they're not getting thousands and thousands of parts and stuff like that.
We run into that too at Hasbro. They didn't even want to turn to set up a line of machines to put together a figure and stuff, unless you were the low was like 10,000, and even that was like, are we gonna really do this for only 10,000 figures? We really want to do 20,000 or 40,000, and but us at a boss fight, we run 3,000. Like, that's our base line. So we're running like a fraction of what like Hasbro or Mattel run.
Yeah.
Which, you're right, it does. The more you run, the lower it brings the price and the cost.
Yep.
So yeah, that's always a big hit on price as well.
Yeah, see, that's the thing, is my brother and I came from a world of collecting and kind of just seeing the final product on the pegs. I've always been fascinated by the back end, test shots, prototypes, everything from the get-go, because we never saw that. And with your expertise in Hasbro, I find that very interesting. I could sit back and listen to you all day talk about that stuff too. Prototypes that got scrapped, or whatever it may be, test shots that were used, or whatever it may be. I just find that very fascinating.
Yeah, I was involved in so much stuff at Hasbro that got scrapped.
I can imagine. In fact, what's funny is I was reading a thing on the Wrestling Figs message board, and a gentleman over at Mattel, his name is Steve Ozer. He's kind of the WWE marketing manager type person. Mm-hmm. He was talking about how prototypes that get scrapped kind of have to go into this, I'm not going to say vault. It's not like a Scrooge McDuck vault, that type of thing, but it's a kind of like a secret room, or a room that where he goes in, and if they have to use something for reference, they'll have to check out the prototype and then return it. It's almost like a library.
Yeah.
So anyways, I've found that absolutely fascinating.
It's good that Mattel has that, because Hasbro has no lockdown on any of that stuff whatsoever, and it kind of evaporates into the ether and into the mists of time, and like
yeah. So anyways, I could sit, I'd be like a kid in a campfire with s'mores on the end of the stick. I'd sit back and listen to you all day about this. But back to Eddie and Ray.
Yeah. So about 4 years later, Jakks puts out the Deluxe Classic 2-pack,
mm-hmm.
which was a Ringside Collectibles exclusive.
Yep.
It came with the cruiserweight belt and the fabric mask because at the time Ray would come out with extra masks and give them to kids in the crowd.
Beautiful touch.
Yeah, amazing. I do not know. I could not find the retail on this figure either.
So I've seen this one go for $180 all the way up to $400.
Yeah.
And this was a glaring hole in my collection that I kick myself for, because back when this came out in 2008, 2009, I got hit by the recession, and I was watching my pennies and dimes and all that stuff. So this was such a glaring hole because I wanted it so bad, but at the same time, I just couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
I wasn't working. I was hoping to have a job lined up, which eventually did become my job. I was sitting back just watching this go off of Ringside's website because unfortunately I just couldn't afford it. But when they came out with that 2-pack, it was that initial, I need to have this.
Yeah.
It hit me. I was just like, I need to have this. I've got to have this, but I can't afford it.
Oh no, I was kind of in the same boat. Like I wanted it. And again, the scale, I kind of talked myself out of it because of the scale and because of money. the listeners will hear this a lot from me. I'm very frugal. I'm kind of cheap with my money. I don't have a lot of it. I never have, especially back then. My wife and I were very, very poor.
Uh-huh.
And so like things like this were extravagance. So it would have been something I passed on at the time.
Mm-hmm.
The set's so good though. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I love the mask. I love Eddie's smirk. I love that Rey is like he's like screaming. Like, it's such a good set. And
so I just actually received this for my birthday from one of our listeners.
I
couldn't believe it. I opened it up. I had a package on the doorstep. I opened it up. They made me do a Twitter live, and so I popped it open, and you know that time where you just don't have anything to say because you're just in amazement?
Yes.
That was what was going on. And the Twitter live video is boring because my facial expressions are just showing what's going on. But but it's such an amazing set. And as I said, it's one of those I regret not getting. There's a lot of those back in the day that I regret not getting due to finances. But it's such a great set. Now, that one, I will say, that is where you do notice that Rey is a little bit on the bigger side as far as scaling.
Yeah.
So he's kind of as the same size as Eddie Guerrero. Now, if you go back to the match, Rey, and if you go back to life, but Rey was nowhere near the size of Eddie. Eddie was thick. He was, he was like a bulldog. He was just a beast.
Eddie was big. I have an interesting story about Rey with this. Is back in Florida, my best friend, whenever WCW came to Florida, which was usually Miami, we would go.
Mm-hmm.
And we were there one night at a Nitro, a Monday Night Nitro, and we managed to get tickets. We were right at the corner of the fences surrounding the ring, right where the walkway met the ring circle. Like, so we were right there at the corner, like only a couple feet from the ring. And so as everybody came out, we could like give high fives and stuff like that, which you would never do now with social distancing. But at the time,
right.
Back in 1996, it was fine. And when Rey came out, it was the first time I realized how tall he was, or not tall he was, is because I'm not tall. And Rey is still many inches shorter than I am.
Gotcha. Yep.
And I was like, holy crap, I can't believe this guy gets in the ring with these giants. It was also the same night I realized how big Hulk Hogan was in actual life, because I didn't realize how giant he was, because he was, at the time, he was always with Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, and they're so big, so much even bigger than him, that I kind of, in my head, I assumed he was like kind of a normal sized guy, and somehow, even though I'd been watching him for years, like, when he came out, I was like, oh my God, he's like 2 heads taller than me. My head is the size of his bicep. Like, it was just, so it was like the same effect on both of them, but just on the opposite, which was
well, that's funny you mentioned that, because I felt that I met Rey Mysterio at the Oakland Coliseum. What they used to do back in the day is to move tickets for a house show. You had to purchase a ticket, but then they would bring in a superstar to sign autographs. And my brother and I are huge autograph collectors. We love getting our wrestling figures signed. So I took Rey's Ruthless Aggression, very first one where he's in white, took that to the Oakland Coliseum, bought the tickets, then went to meet Rey. And when I walked up to him, I didn't realize how much taller I was than him. But it's funny because when you think about that, you're like, oh, I didn't realize how much taller I am than Rey. But when I went to a Golden State Warriors, kind of going to a different sport, but going to a Golden State Warriors game, we had some floor seats, and I'm walking by Steph Curry. Now, on TV, Steph doesn't look as tall compared to all these other guys that are 7 foot. But I'm walking by Steph Curry, and Steph Curry is taller than me. And I'm like, I thought I was the same size as this guy. So it's funny the mentality that goes on in that.
Yeah, it's because you're used to seeing them on television. You don't realize their actual size.
Yep. We don't realize that they're to scale,
Yeah. So just on another note, I did see some people on eBay and stuff asking upwards of $800 for this item. Do not pay $800 for this item.
No.
There's no way. There's no way it's worth that.
Do not. You guys will find a better deal.
Yes.
There will
be patient.
Yes. Patience is virtue. Please be patient in the collecting world. Don't pay overvalue prices. Like the King Harley race figure from Mattel that came out, that figure, it's worth an arm, a leg, and everything other appendage, but don't pay those prices, please. Just be patient. You will find a better deal, or Mattel will make another one of those that you can snag. It may not be the exact same. They may have to go in and make a couple tweaks.
Yeah.
But don't pay those prices, please.
Yeah, I always do that. I've been itching for the Elite Eddie Guerrero. He might be Elite. He might be Best of. I don't remember, but he's in the red with the world title. I've been itching for that one, but it's like it's not even that expensive, but it's still like just one of those things where I get squirrely once it gets over like $40. Like I'm like,
yep. You sound like me in gambling.
Yeah, like I'm just like, every once in a while I'll do it, but not a whole lot. But then sure enough though, they just announced that new Eddie coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, he's not in the exact same outfit and stuff like that, but it's from the same similar era, and I'm super, super excited about that. And eventually we do a lot of cons and stuff. I like trying to find loose ones because I'm going to open it anyway.
Okay.
So like I like to find loose figures anyway. Like it's just kind of fun for me. And I like going to cons and kind of stumbling upon something I'm looking for rather than just jumping on eBay and buying it.
When you can find that deal, that's the best feeling in the world. Exactly.
I'm real squirrely about the speaking about Eddie I'm real squirrely about buying I really want the Elite Chavo Guerrero with the poncho and the headband and everything, but again it's just out of my price range for purchase at this time. So but I'm always looking for it. I'm always checking. I check eBay and stuff. I look around shows and cons and
check loose bins.
Yeah, I love checking loose bins. I love digging through loose bins. If nothing else, I just like find, even though I might not buy stuff, I'm always like seeing things that I just think are fun.
Yeah.
6 years later, Mattel now has the license, not Jakks.
Mm-hmm.
And they do a Hall of Fame Elite Eddie Guerrero in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
He comes with roses, the Latino Heat t-shirt. This figure's not exactly his Halloween Havoc gear. The gold and black are reversed on his pants.
Yes.
And it's missing the red. I'm not sure. Is this more of an outfit that he wore at WWE?
You know what? What's funny is we kind of have a resident person in our community who is so honed in on outfits. Like there are certain outfits people will wear where I can be like, oh yeah, he wore that at Survivor Series 96. Brett wore that at Survivor Series, or Sean wore that at WrestleMania 14. But when it gets to certain stuff like this, where the colors are flipped on the legs, I'm not 100% sure. So he's coming with roses, and I remember that he would always hand roses to China. So it could have been something around there.
Yeah, that would kind of make sense then, more for this outfit. For me, I like accuracy with costumes and stuff, but for me, it's kind of close enough for in my collection. This can kind of go with my Purple Rey from Mattel.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny that this figure on card is, sells anywhere between like $35, $40, and $50. Like that's pretty high considering it's only been, well, now it's been 5 years, but upwards, even like 2 or 3 years ago, this figure on the East Coast, at least up north here, was peg warming.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was all over the place in Targets and stuff like that. And now that it's suddenly worth this, it's like kind of weird to me because I was like, even a couple of years ago, I could still find this.
Yeah. You'll see that a lot in the wrestling figure community. Figures that warm the pegs, all of a sudden will just boom in price. And you're just like, I saw that all the time. I could be reselling all the ones that were warming on the pegs,
Yeah.
making a $20 profit off each single one. It's so confusing how that happens. And you don't know where that comes from or why that happens, but it just does. It's almost like there's a side community where people are like, I need this figure. All of a sudden after it goes off the pegs.
There's a theory about that in toy collecting and the industry, that if something warms the peg or warms the shelf, it means nobody's buying it.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually it goes to discount locations
mm-hmm.
and gets sold more or donated and ends up being opened and played with by kids rather than being collected by collectors, because we all passed on that figure or that playset or whatever. But eventually it makes its way into the hands of kids, so they all get opened and they all get kind of wrecked and played with.
Yep.
Because they're donated or they end up at like Five Belows or, Toy Works back in the day and stuff like that. So that means there ends up being fewer of those items on the card and mint.
Oh,
so that's kind of the theory behind that, why that happens sometimes. It's interesting, and it's kind of one of those weird, that's the thought process anyway behind that happening.
Gotcha. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm not sure about Marvel or DC, if you guys see that over there, same thing happen. Or G.I. Joe.
It is like we see peg warmers, then all of a sudden they're gone.
Yeah.
And then a year or so later, they're worth, maybe they're not worth as much as the Chase figure was, but they're worth more, like almost double what they were in the store.
That makes complete sense. Completely understand.
I will say this. I love this. This is my favorite Eddie figure, this Mattel Elite one. With the Latino Heat t-shirt and the roses and the Eddie is the only guy who could pull off a mullet. Like, he's the only he rocked.
There were some good ones back in the 80s.
Yeah, there were.
It's funny because you look at Eddie, you talk about the mullet. He would come out and you're like, dude's got a mullet. Man, that actually looks pretty good on him.
Like, he rocked it. Yeah, man.
You miss him, and it's funny. You think back to certain passings that have happened during your life, and you always remember where you were when passings have happened, and Eddie is one. I remember waking up, going in, logging onto AOL, and going to a WWE.com, and it said something about Eddie, and I was like, Eddie passed away? What? Like, is this storyline? What's going on? And then that's when everything kind of steamrolled from there. But it's one of those passings that you always remember where you were, and you don't remember where you were when an actor passed away or someone that was in their 80s and he was an old time actor. You don't remember anything like that. But these guys were such larger than life people to us that you looked up to them. Dino Bravo, I remember where I was when I heard that he passed away, but I remember watching Dino Bravo and thinking, this guy is huge. He's going to take on Hogan. He's going to defeat Hogan, but I remember where I was when he passed away because you looked up to these guys. These guys were big. These guys were actually real life superheroes to us when we were kids.
And Eddie was on such a great upswing career wise at the time. Yep. It makes it even all the more tragic. There's always the stories from WCW that he, why him and some of the other guys left was because they were never going to really get a chance at WCW, and they got that chance at WWE, which was great. And his like rise at WWE was fantastic. And then it got cut short, and then shortly after, of course, Benoit's got cut short, which is a whole different conversation. But it was it was all so tragic and awful.
Yep, completely agree.
Well, let's get off the depressing part of the conversation here. So only last year, Mattel Elite 67 put out the Rey in the Halloween Havoc gear. I think this was the first Rey to come out after he returns to WWE.
Trying to go through some basics. I believe you are correct. I'm going through their basic line, which we don't really pay much attention to.
I don't either. I look at it and I kind of move past it pretty quick.
Yeah.
They do in it, and I like that they, I like a lot of the costumes because they can pick more and more costumes to be in that line than the elite line, because the elite line's more expensive. And I can talk about that for hours because we're going to end up doing the same thing in Legends of Lucha Libre. But there's the upcoming Ricochet versus the Dream and
Battle Pack. Yeah,
the Battle Pack, and the Dream's wearing possibly my favorite outfit that he ever wore, which is both an homage to Hulk Hogan and an homage to Ricochet's character on Lucha Underground, Prince Puma.
Yep.
And it's such a great outfit, but I'm like, well, I'm not going to really buy that though because it's a basic, but I kind of want to because it's so awesome. Like,
that's the thing is like they always. When I say they, Mattel will get you with these basics every once in a blue moon. Like for me, I had to have Matt Riddle's very first figure. I love Matt Riddle, and it was a basic, unfortunately, but. When I saw it on the pegs, guess what I did? I was like, darn it, you got me. So I pick up a basic, and I hate collecting basics, but they got me on Matt Riddle because I'm such a huge fan. Now I'm not going to go and collect every single Matt Riddle. I'll get the elite that's coming out in the future, but I had to have his very first figure.
They got me with the battle pack of Zelina and
Andrade,
because he came with the mask, and I was just like, when's the next time they're going to do Zelina? Will probably be a long time before they do another one. So
great call on that.
I picked that one up, and then of course I bought 2 more elite Andrades like shortly after that, like immediately. So. But yeah, this Rey figure, this is one of my favorite Rey figures. It's not my favorite. My favorite Rey figure is the Day of the Dead deco on the Mattel one.
Excellent figure. Best Rey figure anyone has ever done, to say the least.
Yeah, and but I do love this figure. I have a gripe on the costume, and this goes back through all the 2 versions of the Jax version, Phantom costume as well, and that's that they're all done purple and black, and the costume is actually purple and dark purple.
Really?
And yeah, some parts of it are black, but all the graphics on the chest and everything are all dark purple.
Really?
So it kind of drives me nuts that it's like this, and it's been like this three times now. If it was one time, that's fine. The other thing is, and this I'm sure is an edict from WWE, is all the WCW belts have the WWE logo, not the WCW logo.
That's a licensing thing, unfortunately. And that goes back to one of our gripes, but it goes back to a licensing thing as well, as we want a lot of these old school NWA guys with the old school NWA titles. For example, the US title that Barry carried, Barry Windham, Lex Luger, Nikita Koloff, all those guys carried. We would absolutely love that US title. Same thing with the tag titles. Not the first version that there was godly brown leather strap with the big gold, but the ones after where it was like kind of like a dark blue that the Midnight Express, the World Warriors, that they carried. But at the same time, that goes back to a licensing thing. So unfortunately, it can't be made.
And some of those are tied up with TNA, right? Like our Impact, like has some of them.
Yes. Yes.
Like the rights to some of those visuals and stuff like that.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah.
It's all, like our upcoming Legends of Lucha Libre line, we won't have belts in it for the most part because we're not actually signed with any specific like companies. Like we're not signed with AAA or Impact or AEW or any of that. We're signed with the luchadors themselves.
Correct.
So we don't have access to the belts legally to put them in. I would love to have some of those belts, but for now we can't do them unless the deal changes. But
now, is there any talk of you guys maybe doing like a kind of a knockoff looking belt or anything like that? Or
We have talked about making up a belt because I don't know how many people have seen it, but if it's on our Facebook page, it's on my Facebook page. If you root around a little bit, and whenever we meet luchadors, we like to take pictures of them holding it. But a year or so ago, to celebrate the signing with Masked Republic and Legends of Lucha Libre, I designed and had a belt made. So it's a boss fight championship belt.
oh, whoa.
It's got like a skull in the middle and like with like a mask on, and it's got like some boss fight logos and some other stuff all over it. Like, and it's kind of based on the shape. I had it. It's a company. I'll have to look up the company. I can't remember it, but it's they basically laser etch onto these plates.
Oh, whoa.
And they're not super expensive, and they're really cool, and they're really nice looking. In the end, they're heavy and metal, and like we take it to con. Like last year at Expo Lucha, we took it around and had a lot of the luchadors hold it and take photos with it and stuff. So
that's awesome.
It's a fun belt to own.
Actually, sorry to interject, but one thing that bothered me was back in the day, Jax, they wouldn't at first make colored belts. They just had all gold.
Yes.
Then they started adding color onto the belts eventually with some of the tag titles, like the Heart Foundation 3-pack that Jax made. They made the world tag titles with a little bit of color. Same thing with the Deluxe Classic Honky Tonk Man. And he came with a Intercontinental title that had a little bit of color on it. When they started adding color to the belts, oh my God, I thought it was the greatest thing in the world, you know?
Yeah, it helps a belt pop. And almost all of them have color on them.
Exactly. But the one that comes with the Eddie and Rey didn't have the color on it. And even though it was a deluxe, it still was just that solid gold. And I was like, oh, come on, guys, add just a little bit of color, please, you know? But again, that goes back to costs. That comes back to all that. So did it fit under their budget? We don't know.
Yeah, this is a good point to touch on deco and cost. It's interesting because every hit of color, every stamp of color, every brush stroke of color on a figure, they count that at the factory.
Mm-hmm.
So every time it's hit, it goes up. So if you look especially at the Rey Mysterio, these 3 Rey Mysterios, that's a lot of deco on that Phantom costume. Like it's all over the place. Whereas like half of the Eddie Guerrero figure is basically just cast color plastic. Like it's simple. Like there's no deco. And you know, Eddie doesn't even have tattoos. So like nowadays when they do a Rey Mysterio figure, he's completely covered in tattoos and he doesn't wear a shirt anymore when he wrestles. So
correct.
That's an expensive figure too. And so, you know, we're finding this out, especially with, of course, we picked, you know, the 2 figures we're starting with who have wrestled with Rey Mysterio a number of times, you know, is Penta Zero M and Rey Fenix. And they are both covered in tattoos.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's crazy, and I got to spend some time with them backstage, taking photos of all their tattoos and stuff, and for reference for us to replicate them. And they are completely covered in tattoos, and we're gonna learn the hard way the cost issues on this. It's not a mistake that Wave 2 has very few or no tattoos.
Gotcha.
We can kind of recoup a little bit of that.
Well, I talked to you about this on our show, or when we had you on as a special interview, but kind of touching on the Legends of Lucha Libre figures, what we love is the extra Penta Zero mask where it's ripped and torn. It's so beautiful, and I can't even imagine the deco cost on that one. I'm not.
Okay, so one of the things we're doing with our line is we're separating parts of the mask from the face in production. And the reason for this is it's easier for them to paint the eyes and the mouth and, like, you know, Penta's makeup and all that before the mask is on. Because if the mask is on, if the mask is sculpted as part of the head, there's that dimension from the mask to the skin of the wrestler, like
right.
it's too deep for them to get in there and really paint the eyes easily.
Oh.
So we've actually separated the masks in different ways. Don't try and peel off the mask and see what they look like, because if you do, the rest of their face isn't there. The only part of their face that's there is what you see.
Gotcha.
So it's really weird. The figures look really strange without the masks on, actually.
But this is the interesting stuff. I love this background and this insight into stuff like this. This is the fascinating stuff to me. So like just learning that again, dude, every time we talk, you always blow me away with something. But yeah, I didn't know that. We didn't talk about that part.
I'll eventually run out of facts, but
no, you won't.
But it's funny because it's the Rey figures. Oftentimes they're sculpted as part of, the current Rey figures, like the phoenixes on the side of his mask, are separate, and it looks so much nicer than some of the earlier ones where it was part of the face, where the head was all one piece.
Gotcha.
So they've been doing that too as they get further along. One of the things I would love to have seen on this Rey Mysterio Elite especially is the torn mask, because Eddie does try and tear his mask off of him during the match.
Yes, 100%.
And that would have been an amazing piece, especially like as the Elites have gone on, they've gotten more and more parts added to them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always it's like, and this one was just on the cusp of them starting to add more and more parts.
Well, you know what's funny is the one thing that I'm going to nitpick this figure, because it is an excellent figure. The one little nitpick I always felt is they didn't go with a darker purple. And it's to me, I felt that his outfit needed a little bit of a darker purple than what was on this figure. But if you go back to the best of the WCW figure, now correct me if I'm wrong, but I felt that was a darker purple.
It's definitely, I feel like the best of WCW figure is definitely a closer purple to what he was actually wearing.
Yeah, and this one was a lighter, and that was my small little nitpick. And if that's my only nitpick, then you guys hit a home run.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's funny because I bought this, I was really wanted this figure, and I couldn't find it anywhere. I never saw this figure in a store.
Really?
And then last year in San Diego, I was at, not San Diego Comic-Con, but I was at Expo Lucha promoting the Legends of Lucha Libre line, and one of the booths had one for $20, which is retail price. So I was really excited and bought it immediately. Like, didn't even blink, pause or anything. I'm like, I'll take that. And then I opened it right there. There are like photos floating around the internet of our Phoenix, which was the only figure we had sculpted at the time, next to the Rey Mysterio figure. Because like, we would like, people would come up and like, how's the scale with Mattel? And I'm like, well, here you go.
Well, that's actually something that I had forgotten about, because when we were looking at the boss fight figures, the first question that is out of every collector's mouth, are they in scale with Mattel's?
Yeah.
That is the first question. And to me, if you guys would have gone a little bit bigger or anything like that, and this is just as a different view, and I don't have the same views as the next collector that's 2 houses down for me. Yeah. But if you guys went a little bit bigger, that would have been fine by me. But I'm glad you guys did go with that same scale, or kind of close. You guys were in the same, very close actually.
Yeah.
Because I remember seeing that photo going around, because everybody was like, hey, are these in scale? Are these in scale? And I used that photo quite a few times on Twitter to show the reference. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I had forgotten all about that. But we had this conversation when you and I were talking on our special interview. I'm okay if somebody wants to try a different scale, like DC McFarlane. They went with a 7-inch scale over the Marvel Legends 6-inch scale. And I'm okay with that, because I love out of the box thinking. And if it involves going a little bit bigger, I'm okay with that. I'm not talking about Jack's obese style bigger figures that we were seeing back in the day, but I'm okay with people trying a different scale, going up, going down. To me, that's what I loved about collecting wrestling figures from over the 36 years. I look at my loose shelf. I have these 8-inch rubber LJN figures. Then it goes down to a 4-inch Hasbro figure, then back up to these Jakks BCA figures. I love seeing the different scales. It's almost like a lineage or a history of wrestling figures that are not in scale with each other, and that's what I love. If they were uniform, to me that would be boring.
Yeah,
but
in the end, we went with the same scale as Mattel because we figured people wanted to put them together.
Yes,
you know, a lot of people at WWE now, Lucha Underground with Penta and talent that we have access to for Legends of Lucha Libre. So we figured people are going to want to put Rey with Penta and Phoenix, or Ricochet with Penta and Phoenix, things like that. So
and you guys aren't wrong. You guys actually hit it out of the park with that scaling, because a lot of people want those dream matches.
Yeah.
The figure photographers want to take a picture of Ricochet with Penta or Phoenix or whatever it may be.
How amazing is that Day of the Dead Rey gonna look with Penta and Phoenix?
Exactly.
Amazing little.
And see, that's the funny thing is, my view is kind of not those with the majority of collectors. And a lot of these collectors want to line these figures up and have their dream matches.
Yeah.
And like with the Jushin Thunder Liger figures that came out from Storm Collectibles, a lot of these people were like, it's a great figure that looks great. The deco, the cape, everything is on it. He's just got a little bit of a bigger body. He's not in scale as far as body wise, like girth or like muscular wise, as with my Mattels. And I'm like, now I look at that Jushin Thunder Liger and I think it's like one of the best figures I've ever seen in my life.
A gorgeous figure.
Yes. So I understand a lot of people's wanting to keep it in the same scale as their WWE figures, because they do want to have their dream matches. And I've got to go back, as a kid, I was so vanilla. I would take my LJNs and only wrestle with my LJNs. That what I was seeing on Coliseum home videos had to be what I was wrestling with.
Yeah.
So if I saw Hogan and Bundy in a cage, I was having Hogan and Bundy in a cage. And then I would take my AWA Remcos and wrestle with them. They had to be separated. They had to, they were their own federations.
Yeah, I didn't do that. Like, I didn't mix my Star Wars with my Joes or my.
Yes.
That didn't happen.
Right. Yeah, but going back to originally what I said is, you guys did it right by hitting a home run with those figures, and
thank you.
There's a lot of collectors that are excited for these figures. A lot, especially with the Torn Mask Penta. That keeps getting brought up quite a bit in DMs or in Twitter feeds or Instagram feeds or whatever it may be. So you guys have done really, really well.
Well, yeah, it's funny because that's the figure where you see the most of his face. That you do see this whole part of his face, and I gotta say, we had a bit of a hard time getting that likeness because we didn't have photos of him without the makeup on. Like, it was like, we're not allowed to have those photos. So
right.
So yeah, I think this was a great discussion. I hope people have gleaned something from it.
Well,
I don't know what that is. But
well, as I always say is, and plus I'm going to ask if you ever want to be on our show, and you and my brother will have your own G.I. Joe segment, but I love your insight, the knowledge that you have regarding toys, the background, test shots, prototypes, whatever it may be, working at Hasbro, doing Boss Fight, working with Master Republic. The insight is very knowledgeable to a lot of collectors, and that's what I love. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'll be perfectly honest. You and your brother know way more about wrestling toys than I do.
When you do it for 36 years, you kind of you kind of pick up one or two.
Yeah. It's kind of too bad. During this quarantine time, all of my wrestling toys are in my office. Mm-hmm. And I can't go to my office right now. So I am the only wrestling toy I have is this Toy Biz Vampiro, who's been hanging out with me on my desk while I work.
I'm looking forward to talking about that one.
Yeah, me too.
You mentioned that you were a big fan of the Toy Biz figures.
Oh yes, I am.
And there was this isn't to start a debate or anything or whatever, but I wasn't a fan of the Toy Biz figures, and we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
But that Vampiro and the Faces of Sting set that came out, those were some home run figures from Toy Biz. Really, but we'll get into that later down the road.
Oh yeah. So I hope everyone enjoyed this. We're going to do some shout outs and some plugs here real quick. Be sure to check out Boss Fight Studio on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Pre-order our Legends of Lucha Libre at bossfightshop.com. We have the first 2 figures up for pre-order, as well as the first 2 accessory sets. A huge shout out to Mask Republic and Kevin Kleinrock for the opportunity to do this podcast and his amazing partnership for our Legends of Lucha Libre line. He's been amazing. Of course, the Lucha Central website and the Lucha Central channel coming up. Another shout out to our editor producer Chris McLeod. Make sure you listen to his The Full Force, a fan cast about the world of Action Force and G.I. Joe. It's an amazing podcast. I'm often on there, but not all the time. Shout out to Ringside Collectibles for the great service and for the great photos I pulled off their site this week to help put this together and talk about the toys, since we didn't have any of them on hand. And finally, a huge shout out to the WWE talent that was released this week. Not a single one of them deserved this, and I know all of them will land on their feet, whether that means back in WWE or at one of the other promotions. It's a good time to be a wrestling fan. It's a good time to be a wrestler, and I think it's a bummer seeing that this pandemic has led to some of this. But some of my favorite wrestlers were on that list: Hawkins, Ryder, Leo Rush, Sarah Logan, Rusev. Man, it is just it's gonna be a slim year for WWE, I guess, the rest of the year. We'll see what they do. I hope and I know that most of them are gonna land on their feet. So Jeff, where can everybody follow you?
If anybody, actually, my brother and I are kind of pushing people away. We have t-shirts on whatamaneuver.net and Pro Wrestling Tees, but during this time, we want you guys to go support smaller companies and wrestlers that are kind of need it more than we do. So we want you guys to go support your favorite wrestler who entertains us and entertains everybody over at Pro Wrestling Tees, or if they have something that you want to buy off them, go support them. So that's what my brother and I have been pushing lately, is just go help out the smaller companies that need your dollars during this time. But if you want to if you're kicking back, relaxing, and out for a walk, why don't you download the Fullyposeable Wrestling Figure Podcast, and there you go. You can listen to a bunch of backlog episodes, over 4 years worth. You can hear my brother and I just ramble about wrestling figures. So I highly recommend that. I am going to be listening to Chris. I see Chris up there. I'm going to check out the Full Force podcast, and I'm going to make my brother listen to it too, because he is such a huge G.I. Joe nut, especially right now. He's all in on these pre-orders right now with the Hasbro line. So I'm going to make my brother check that out as well. So iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, just do searches. If you type in Fullyposeable Wrestling Figure Podcast into your Google search, we'll pop right up.
Awesome. Well, that's our first show. I hope everybody enjoyed listening to us discuss Lucha Legends and Halloween Havoc, as well as all of our tangents. Join us next time. If you have suggestions on specific Lucha action figures you'd like us to talk about, message me on Facebook, and I'll add it to our list. We are kind of going to jump around company to company and Lucha to Lucha, and I think it's going to be a fun time. So Thank you for listening.